What's up, everybody? This is BR, and today's topic was requested by Umkar Das on my Battle Royales Are Dying, sort of, video. He requested that I talk about why retro games have just kind of faded out in recent years. Now, I'm not entirely sure what he means by retro. I don't know if he means, modern games that are created with retro graphics, or just old games that are re-released to the modern age. But for the sake of answering his topic, just in case it's either one, I'm gonna cover both of them in this video, one after the other. So first off, let's talk about games that look retro, that are not being made anymore. Now, if you look at it at face value, yeah, you don't really get that many 16-bit games anymore, or even 8-bit games anymore. Especially with the rise of boomer shooters, which take the aesthetic of the Nintendo 64 and early PC games. And I really think this all just has to be chalked up to market preference. I think around the 2010s, 16-bit games were really popular because 20 years before was 1990, and that was really around the height of the Super Nintendo and other consoles that were 16-bit. And now you fast forward to 2020, and 20 years ago is the early 2000s. So it makes sense that the young adults who are most likely to be playing video games are the ones that will influence developers with their nostalgia. I mean, if you really think about it, people who lived around the Super Nintendo age are now entering the 30s and 40s. And they're less likely to be playing video games nowadays, especially if they have their own careers. So it makes sense that as time moves on, what is now considered retro changes. I mean, we're already kind of seeing people be really nostalgic for the Xbox 360 era. And I do think that once we hit 2026, I'm going to be seeing a lot of the games that I played when I was a kid. And unfortunately, it's going to be considered retro. So if we think about retro like we usually do in mainstream media, like 16-bit, 8-bit games and chiptunes and pixel graphics, that's not the market majority anymore. The market majority is now the late 90s and early 2000s, and well, developers want to cater to that as far as nostalgia goes. And if we go by the more general definition of retro, well, retro has changed. It no longer means 8-bit, 16-bit anymore. Now we're talking about early polygonal graphics, the PlayStation, the N64, the Dreamcast, and as much as I don't like to admit it, we're all kind of growing old now. And that also includes the new developers who have fond memories of this generation. And the other question is, how come we don't see older games being re-released a lot? Now there are many different types of perspectives here, and I'd like to go one by one on each of them. In the corporate perspective, it isn't as profitable as you might think to re-release a game. There is very much still a cost of releasing the game even if it's already developed. Because you also have to take into account opportunity cost. I mean, instead of an old game, they could have released something new that probably made tons more money. Not to mention that people really do want new stuff. They don't want to be given the old stuff again and again at full price. And really that's the thing, it's the incentive. And there's a lot more incentive in releasing something new than something old. After all, people really don't like getting sold the same thing over and over again. I mean, especially at full price. And that pretty much applies to every single publisher. Well, except Nintendo. They just fucking hate their fans. And if companies are going to be thinking of releasing something old, they might just either remaster it or remake it. It sounds a lot better in marketing when something is brand new but still familiar. And companies usually add stuff like better graphics, visuals, unreleased stuff, things that really cater to that kind of fan base. And I do think that THQ Nordic is really doing a bang-up job on that. And remaking also shows some success as it can be considered something brand new without being held down by the older games. I think Bethesda showed that there is a lot of promise in remaking something from the ground up, allowing it to be reinvented by the modern times, but still hold on to a little bit of the old things without being restricted by it, of course. But do I think that retro releases are ever gonna, stop or die? I don't think so. I think it just happens in kind of a cycle. After a while, you kind of do get a little bit nostalgic, but you don't want to be nostalgic all the time. Sometimes you want new. You need to have a good balance of that. So for every couple years, we're going to get a retro renaissance, and then we're going to get a new games renaissance, and then we're going to get a retro renaissance, and maybe a renaissance of just pure shit, and then go back to the retro renaissance, new renaissance, blah, 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 blah. And that's what I think would happen to retro releases. There really isn't much incentive at the moment. And personally, I think that's actually a really good thing. I especially like it when studios re-release their games but with extra stuff added onto it to justify the $60 price tag. And if you ever do want to go back in time, you can always just emulate your games. Of course, legally, by purchasing an old copy of it, dumping the ROM, and then playing it on your computer. And I want to make it very clear. Emulating games is not illegal, Nintendo! But what do you guys think? Leave your opinion in the comments down below. Like the video if you found it interesting, dislike it if you disliked it, and if you'd like to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you later.